Okay, let's set the scene. It's the late 4th century BCE. We are on the Indian subcontinent, but if you were looking at a map, you wouldn't recognize it. It's a
Right.
complete mess. It's fractured, chaotic, and honestly, pretty dangerous.
It really is the definition of a power vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
You have to picture the subcontinent just broken up into these small, squabbling kingdoms, these tribal republics they called Janapadas,
And they're all at war, basically.
constantly at each other's throats, yeah. And then just to stir the pot, Alexander the Great has just come crashing through the Northwest, smashed all the existing powers, and then, very conveniently, he dies in 323 BCE.
Right, talk about a geopolitical nightmare. So you've got local warlords, you've got leaderless Greek armies just hanging around.
And zero central authority. None. It is a full-on Game of Thrones scenario. But on this huge continental scale, Alexander's generals are already starting to fight each other, and the local people are just done with all of it.
And right in the middle of this absolute storm, one man rises up. And he does something that, until that moment, must have seemed completely impossible.
He unifies the subcontinent. He forges the first true Indian empire, the Maurya Empire.
We're talking, of course, about Chandragupta Maurya, the first emperor. And the whole mission for this deep dive is to try and unpack the life of this man. But here's the problem I hit. Like, immediately when I started looking at the sources you sent over, we're trying to build a biography of maybe the most important figure in ancient Indian history. And the sources, they're a bit of a disaster, aren't they?
Disaster is maybe a strong word, but it's definitely a historian's headache. I mean, that is the core tension of this whole story, history versus legend. To understand Chandragupta, you have to look at this whole stack of sources that are all, well, they're all biased, and crucially, they were all written centuries too late.
Right, because it's not like we have his diary. We don't have court records from his reign saying, day 47, conquered Magadha.
We have nothing like that. It feels like trying to reconstruct the life of a ghost sometimes. On one side, you have the Greek and Roman accounts, writers like Megasthenes, Justin, Plutarch.
Yeah.
But they're writing for a Western audience. And they're often using secondhand reports or memoirs written hundreds of years after Chandragupta was even alive.
So they're looking at him from the outside and way, way after the fact.
Precisely. And then on the other side, you have the Indian texts, Buddhist, Jain, and Brahmanical literature. But here's the real kicker. Most of these were written between the 4th and 12th centuries CE.
So a gap of, what, 600 to 1500 years?
At least, yeah.
Just to put that in perspective for you listening, that is like us trying to write a definitive biography of, say, Charlemagne, but our only sources are some rumors we found on the internet and a few religious pamphlets printed in the year 2000.
That is a scarily accurate analogy. And because these sources are religious, they all have an agenda. They completely contradict each other on his birth, his caste, how he took power, and they definitely don't agree on how he died.
So our job today is to sift through all these contradictions and try to find the man in the middle of all of it.
If we can.
Before we even try to untangle that mess, though, there's this one specific insight from the research that I think we have to start with. It's like the Rosetta Stone moment for this entire timeline. It involves a British linguist in 1793, a guy named Sir William Jones.
This is the sheet anchor. That's what historians call it. The sheet anchor of Indian chronology. And it is arguably one of the most important discoveries in the entire history of Indology.
So what did he find?
Okay, so for centuries, Western scholars had been reading these classical Greek texts, and the Greeks kept mentioning this powerful Indian king. His name was Sandrocatus, or sometimes Sandrocatos.
Sandrocatus? It sounds kind of Greek or Roman.
Right. And they knew the Sandrocatus guy had met Alexander's successors. They knew he was a big deal, but they had absolutely no idea who he was in the Indian historical record. They just figured, maybe he was some minor regional chief that the Indians had forgotten about.
Until Jones connects the dots.
Jones had this flash of genius. He realized that Sandrocatus wasn't a random name. It was just a clumsy Greek attempt at pronouncing Chandragupta.
Ah, and that is the key. Because we know exactly when Alexander the Great lived. We know Sandrocatus met his generals. So suddenly you can put a pin in the timeline.
It synchronizes everything. Without that one identification, all of early Indian history, the dates, they would just be floating in a void. We know Chandragupta's reign begins roughly around 321 or 320 BCE because the Greeks tell us. It gives us a firm starting point.
Okay, so thanks to Sandrocatus, we have a date, we have a name, but who was he? Because this is where the sources really start to go to war with each other. I mean, depending on which text you pick up, Chandragupta is either a noble prince or a complete nobody.
This is where you can really see the agendas of the writers coming out. So let's start with the humble origin theory. This one usually comes from the grammatical sources and some of the Roman historians. The Roman writer Justin, for instance, he flat out writes that Chandragupta was born in humble life.
And then you have that Sanskrit drama, the Mudrarakshasa, which, by the way, is a fantastic title.
The Signet Ring of Rakshasa. It's basically a political thriller, but it was written centuries and centuries later. And in it, it uses these terms for Chandragupta, like Vrishala and Kulahina.
Okay, you have to help us out with the terminology here. What do those actually mean?
Kulahina is pretty straightforward. It means of low lineage or someone without a recognized noble family background. Vrishala is a bit trickier. It's often interpreted as son of a Shudra.
And the Shudras were?
In the caste hierarchy of the time, the Shudras were the lowest of the four main social classes, the Varnas. They were generally the laboring class, the servants.
There's also that kind of salacious story about his mother, right? That he was the son of a Nanda king, but through a concubine?
That's the Mura theory, yeah. The idea is that his mother was a woman named Mura, who was a servant or a concubine in the Nanda king's court. So Maurya is a matronymic. It means son of Mura.
So that gives him a connection to royalty, but it also marks him as illegitimate.
Exactly. It makes him the classic underdog, the bastard son fighting against the very system that rejected him. It's a great story.
It is a great story. But then you flip over to the Buddhist and Jain texts, and they seem to hate that story.
They despise it. For them, their great emperor has to be special. He can't be a commoner. So the Buddhist text, the Mahavamsa, it claims he was a kshatriya, the warrior and ruling caste.
They need him to be blue blood.
Oh, even better than that. They connect him directly to the Buddha's own family. They say he belonged to the Maurya clan, which was supposedly a branch of the Shakya clan, the Buddha's lineage.
Ah.
And this leads to my favorite little linguistic twist to this whole research stack.
The peacocks.
The peacocks.
Ah.
In the Pali language, the word for peacock is mora. In Sanskrit, it's mayura. And the Buddhist texts claim his family came from a region that was just overrun with peacocks, so they were called the Peacock clan.
So Maurya doesn't mean son of the servant Mira. It means the peacock lords.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
ancient branding. It's a total rebranding.
Yeah.
If you're a Buddhist writer 500 years later, you don't want the man who unified India to be the son of a maid. You want him to be a noble warrior with a connection to the Buddha himself.
And what about the Jains? Where do they land on this?
The Jains kind of split the difference. The Jain texts describe him as the son of a village chief who raised peacocks.
Huh. So he's not a king, but he's not a servant either.
Right. He's a community leader from a peacock breeding community.
It's just fascinating how history shifts depending on who's holding the pen. But look, regardless of whether he was a peacock breeder or a prince, he clearly didn't do this alone. We have to introduce the other main character in this story, the Merlin to his Arthur.
Chanakya, also known as Kochuya, or sometimes Vishnugupta. You really cannot tell the story of Chandragupta without talking about Chanakya.
This is the guy who supposedly wrote the Arthashastra, which everyone always compares to Machiavelli's The Prince.
That comparison gets made a lot, but honestly, it kind of sells the Arthashastra short. It's so much more than that. It's a complete, comprehensive manual on statecraft. It covers everything from how to manage an economy, how to set up a massive spy network, to, when it's appropriate to assassinate your enemies.
So it's practical.
It is cold, rational, and incredibly pragmatic. And Chanakya is the mastermind who puts all of this into practice through Chandragupta.
So how do they actually meet? Is it like a destiny thing?
The legends lean very heavily into destiny, yes. The most common story, and you find this in both Buddhist and Hindu texts, is that Chanakya is wandering through a forest and he stumbles upon a group of kids playing. And young Chandragupta is playing the role of king.
Bossing the other kids around.
But he's doing it well. He's holding a mock court, he's dispensing justice, he's organizing these fake trials, and Chanakya, this brilliant political strategist, just watches this random kid and sees raw, unprocessed genius. He sees the mark of sovereignty on him.
So what does he do?
He essentially buys the boy from his foster father, who's a hunter in this version of the story, and adopts him.
It's a classic talent scout narrative. I'm taking this kid to the big leagues. But why? Chanakya isn't doing this out of the goodness of his heart. He needs a weapon.
He needs a weapon to destroy the Nanda dynasty.
Okay, let's talk about the Nandas. Because before the Mauryas, the Nandas were the big dogs on the block, right?
Oh, yeah. The Nanda Empire was based in the kingdom of Magadha, that's in modern-day Bihar, and they were incredibly powerful and incredibly rich. But by all accounts, Greek sources, Indian sources, everyone agrees, the current king, Nanda, was despised.
Why?
He was seen as lowborn himself, which is ironic. He was obsessed with hoarding gold and apparently just cruel and arrogant to his subjects.
And he made the fatal mistake of insulting Chanakya.
A fatal mistake.
Yeah.
The story goes that Chanakya traveled to the capital, Pataliputra, to some kind of center of learning or a charity foundation. But Nanda insulted him. Some sources say he mocked Chanakya's appearance. He was supposedly quite ugly, had broken teeth. Others say he was physically shoved out of the assembly hall.
You should never, ever humiliate the smartest guy in the room.
Huge mistake. Chanakya stands up, unties his shika, that's the traditional top knot that Brahmin scholars wear, and he swears this solemn vow. He says, "I will not retie this knot until I have uprooted and destroyed the Nanda dynasty completely."
That is so cinematic. It's personal revenge fueling an imperial revolution.
So he takes his new prodigy, Chandragupta, to Taxila. And we need to pause on Taxila for a second because it's absolutely crucial to understanding how Chandragupta becomes so competent.
This is in the far northwest, right? Near modern-day Islamabad.
Yes. And at that time, Taxila was the intellectual capital of the known world. You should think of it as a combination of, like, Harvard, West Point, and a chaotic Wild West frontier trading post.
So Chandragupta goes there to learn what? Philosophy, the Vedas?
He learns the Vedas, sure, but he also learns military strategy, diplomacy, economics, law, and crucially, because Taxila was on the frontier with the Greek-controlled territories, he saw the Greeks. He probably saw the Macedonian phalanxes drill. He understood exactly how the enemy fought.
He's getting a world-class education in empire building.
And while he's there, he's recruiting. This is where the rise to power actually begins. Alexander dies in 323 BCE. The Greek generals immediately start fighting each other, the locals are restless, and Chandragupta starts building an army.
I want to talk about this army because Justin, the Roman historian, has this very specific, kind of derogatory description of them. He calls them robbers.
He uses the Latin word latrones, yeah.
Yeah.
But we have to be really careful with that translation. Robbers makes them sound like a criminal gang. But in the context of ancient India, he likely meant something more like mercenaries or kingless people.
Kingless people, what does that mean?
The whole northwestern region was full of these fiercely independent republican clans. The texts called them Ayudajivi, which literally translates to those who live by arms. These were tough, proud, warrior communities who had just finished resisting Alexander. They weren't criminals, they were a ready-made militia.
Justin also has a really interesting quote where he first calls Chandragupta a liberator.
It's such a complex and telling quote. He says Chandragupta led the revolt to liberate India from the servitude of the Greek prefects.
Yeah.
But then Justin adds this twist. He says that after he won, Chandragupta oppressed the very people he has liberated once he took the throne for himself.
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
It's the classic revolutionary cycle. But strategically, what he does is brilliant. He clears the board in the west first. He assassinates the Greek governors, Nicanor and Philip. He secures his base of operations.
So he's got the northwest locked down. Now he turns his eyes to the real prize, the Nanda Empire in the east. And this is David versus Goliath.
It really is. The Nandas had a professional standing army of 200,000 infantry, something like 60,000 cavalry, and thousands of war elephants. Chandragupta's ragtag militia shouldn't have stood a chance.
And initially they didn't, right? There's that legend that they tried to attack the capital, Pataliputra, directly and just got crushed.
This is where we get the warm food strategy. It's a story that appears in both the Buddhist and the Jain commentaries. The legend is that after a humiliating defeat, Chandragupta and Chanakya are on the run in disguise. They wander through a village and they overhear a mother scolding her child.
And what did the kid do?
The child tried to eat a hot bowl of porridge, or maybe it's a cake. The versions differ, by sticking their hand right into the steaming hot center. And they burn their fingers, of course.
And the mother says something like, "Don't be an idiot like Chandragupta."
Exactly that. She says, "You are acting just like Chandragupta. He attacked the center first. The center is hot and well defended. You have to eat from the edges where it's cool and work your way in."
That is such a brilliant, simple way to explain grand strategy. You don't strike at the heart of the enemy's power. You dismantle the periphery first.
And that's exactly what they did. They completely changed their tactics. They started conquering the outer garrisons, cutting off supply lines, recruiting from the territories they conquered, and slowly, methodically squeezing the Nanda Empire until they could finally lay siege to Pataliputra.
And around 321 or 319 BCE, the coup is complete. Nanda is defeated. The Nanda dynasty is erased from history, and the Mauryan Empire begins.
It was a total regime change. But Chandragupta doesn't really get to rest, because just as he's settling into the throne, the Greeks come back.
Enter Seleucus Nicator.
Seleucus the First Nicator, the victor. He was one of Alexander's most capable and ambitious generals. He's carved out his own massive empire in Persia and Babylon, the Seleucid Empire, and he decides he wants those Indian provinces back.
So he marches his army to the Indus River around 305 BCE, and he's probably expecting to just roll over some local chieftain like Alexander did.
He's expecting the fractured, squabbling India that Alexander had found. Instead, he runs into a unified wall. He finds Chandragupta waiting for him with a massive, battle-hardened, unified army.
Now, usually in history, when two massive empires meet like this on a border, we get a cataclysmic battle. We get a Battle of the Hydaspes, Part 2. But that is not what happens here.
No. And what happens is actually much more interesting than a battle. It's a negotiation. Seleucus looks at this situation and realizes he can't win a quick, decisive victory. And he has other bigger problems. He has rival Greek generals attacking him back in the West. He cannot afford to get bogged down in a long, drawn-out guerrilla war in India.
So they cut a deal. And looking at the terms of this treaty, it looks like one of the most lopsided trades in all of ancient history.
It is absolutely astonishing when you look at it. Seleucus cedes a massive amount of territory. We're talking about the regions of Peloponnesote, Arachosia, and Gedrosia.
Let's translate that to modern geography for everyone.
Basically, he gives up Kabul, Kandahar, Herat, and most of Balochistan. He hands over almost all of modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan west of the Indus River to Chandragupta.
And what does Chandragupta give him in return for all that land?
500 war elephants.
500 elephants. Now, to a modern ear, trading half of Afghanistan for 500 animals just sounds completely insane. Did Seleucus get ripped off?
Not at all, actually. You have to understand the military meta of the 4th century BCE. Elephants were the tanks of the ancient world. They were shock and awe weapons. They could smash through infantry formations. And Seleucus didn't need more land in India. He needed to crush his rival, Antigonus, back in Syria.
So he needed the tanks right now more than he needed the territory.
And it worked. Those 500 elephants were arguably the deciding factor at the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BCE. Seleucus won his Western wars because of the elephants Chandragupta gave him.
So it really was a win-win. Chandragupta gets a secure, defensible border, the Hindu Kush Mountains, which basically creates a natural defensive wall for India, and Seleucus gets his superweapons.
They even sealed the deal with a marriage alliance. The sources are a bit vague. It might have been Chandragupta marrying a daughter or niece of Seleucus, but it symbolized this new fusion of East and West. And as part of the deal, Seleucus sent an ambassador to live permanently at Chandragupta's court.
Megasthenes.
Megasthenes. And thank goodness he did, because Megasthenes wrote a book called the Indica. Now, the original book is lost, but later Greek and Roman writers quoted from it so extensively that we can piece a lot of it back together. And it gives us this incredible detailed window into what this new Mauryan Empire actually looked like.
So let's look through that window. Chandragupta has gone from a robber leader, or whatever you want to call him, to ruling this vast empire that stretches from the Himalayas all the way down to the Deccan Plateau in the south. How did he actually run this thing?
Well, it wasn't a modern nation-state with firm borders everywhere. Historians often use a spiderweb model to describe Mauryan governance.
Explain the spiderweb model.
Okay, so imagine the core, the kingdom of Magadha and the capital Pataliputra, as the spider in the center of the web. The control there is absolute, it's centralized, and it's very tight. Then you have the main strands of the web. These are the major highways, the rivers, the key trade routes that connect the center to the big provincial capitals like Taxila or Ujjain.
And the empty spaces in between the strands.
The forests, the tribal areas, the remote villages. The control there was much looser. As long as they paid their tribute and didn't cause trouble, the central state largely left them alone. But where the state did govern, it was incredibly, almost obsessively sophisticated.
Yeah, Megasthenes describes the city administration of Pataliputra in a really specific detail. He talks about these committees, these 3 bodies.
It's almost bureaucratic overkill. He describes a city council made up of 6 boards, with 5 members on each board. One board looked after industrial arts and artisans. Another one looked after foreigners, making sure they were watched, but also cared for. Another one was in charge of birth and death registration. Vital statistics.
That just sounds incredibly modern. They were doing census work in 300 BCE.
Absolutely. It's essential for taxation and military recruitment. They also had a board for trade and commerce, verifying weights and measures to prevent fraud. And then, of course, a board for the military, organizing the infantry, cavalry, chariots, and the all-important elephant corps.
And they were building the infrastructure to match this bureaucracy.
The road network was legendary. They built the precursor to the Grand Trunk Road, a royal highway that stretched over 1,000 miles, all the way from the capital in the east to Taxila in the far northwest. They planted trees for shade, they dug wells every few miles, and they built rest houses for travelers.
And I was reading about the irrigation projects, the Sudarshana Lake in Gujarat.
Yes, that's a perfect example of the empire's reach. It was a massive man-made reservoir with embankments and canals. We know about it because centuries later, another king inscribed a rock saying, "By the way, I just repaired the lake that Chandragupta Maurya built." It's proof that they could mobilize resources and labor thousands of miles from the capital.
But here's the dark side of all this efficiency and control. Ruling this massive empire sounds incredibly stressful, and there is this theme of paranoia that just runs through all the accounts of Chandragupta's personal life.
Oh, absolutely. He was living in a golden cage. Megasthenes and others note that Chandragupta lived in constant mortal fear of assassination.
I read that he changed his bedroom every single night.
Every single night. He never slept in the same bed 2 nights in a row, just to confuse any potential assassins who might have bribed the palace guards.
And speaking of guards, the Greek sources mention something that they found really exotic and strange. He was guarded by women.
A whole cordon of female bodyguards. The Greeks found this very odd, but in the context of Indian court politics, it actually made a lot of strategic sense.
Why is that?
Well, think about it. In a court filled with ambitious clans, rival male princes, and powerful military generals who might want to stage a coup, women were often seen as being outside that whole patriarchal power structure. Their loyalty was solely to the king's person, not to their clan or their own ambition. They were less likely to be involved in the dynastic plotting.
It really paints a picture of a man who trusts absolutely no one. He has spies everywhere, right?
Chanakya's Arthashastra describes a surveillance state that would make modern intelligence agencies blush. It recommends using ascetics, beggars, merchants, students, even courtesans as spies. The king was meant to be the eye of the state, watching everything all the time.
So you have this man who has achieved the impossible. He has wealth beyond imagination, he has defeated the Greeks, he controls almost the entire known world. But he can't sleep in the same room twice. He's constantly looking over his shoulder.
Which is what makes the end of his life even more shocking and, well, controversial. Because if you believe the Jain traditions, he just walks away from it all.
This is the plot twist I did not see coming when I started the research. The renunciation.
It's a radical shift. According to the Jain texts, specifically a 12th century work by a monk named Hemachandra, a terrible famine hit the empire. It was prophesied to last for 12 long years.
Yeah.
And Chandragupta is deeply personally affected by the suffering he sees.
And his spiritual guide at this point is a famous Jain sage, Vajrabahu.
Yes. And the legend says that Chandragupta abdicates his throne, just gives it up. He hands the entire empire over to his son, Bindusara. He takes off the royal robes, the jewelry, the armor, and he puts on the simple white garb of a Jain monk.
And he leaves the capital he fought so hard to conquer.
He joins Vajrabahu and a large group of monks on a migration south. They walk over 1,000 miles from Pataliputra, all the way to a place in modern-day Karnataka called Shravanabelagala.
And there, on a small hill, the former emperor of India performs the ultimate Jain ritual, Salakana.
Salakana. It is the ritual of voluntarily and gradually fasting to death.
We need to explain this carefully because to a modern Western listener, this just sounds like suicide.
And in Jain theology, it is considered fundamentally distinct from suicide. Suicide is seen as an act of passion or despair or anger. Salakana is viewed as a triumphant, completely dispassionate shedding of the physical body when it can no longer serve a spiritual purpose. It's the ultimate act of non-attachment. You gradually reduce your intake of food and water, meditating constantly until the body simply ceases to function.
That is profoundly intense. To go from the warm food strategy of violent conquest, from the female bodyguards and the network of spies, to sitting on a quiet, rocky hill, deliberately starving yourself to death.
It's an incredibly powerful image. It contrasts the violent, pragmatic rise to power with a completely non-violent spiritual end.
I have to play the skeptic here. Do we actually believe this happened? Or is this another classic case of history versus legend?
And that is the million-dollar question for scholars. You have to be really careful. The main texts that describe this in detail were written in the 12th century. That is 1,400 years after he supposedly died.
That is a very long time for a story to grow and change.
It is, and the Greek sources, which are much, much earlier, say that he continued Vedic animal sacrifices and loved hunting right up until the end of his reign. They don't mention him becoming a Jain monk at all.
So it could just be a legend created much later to claim a great king for the Jain faith. Like, look, even the emperor of all India realized our way was the best.
It's very possible. Some scholars have argued that the Chandragupta mentioned in the early inscriptions that might be a different person, maybe his great-grandson Samprati, who was a known patron of Jainism.
But the hill itself is still called Chandragiri Chandra's Hill to this day.
It is, and the local tradition there is incredibly strong. So even if the specific details are legendary, the core idea that a great king would abdicate his throne to seek a spiritual end resonates very deeply in Indian culture. It fits the ideal of the vanaprastha stage of life, where an older person retires from worldly duties to focus on philosophy and religion.
So we have the warrior, the emperor, and finally the monk. It's quite an arc for one lifetime.
It is unique in world history. I mean, usually emperors die in bed of old age, or they die in battle, or they're assassinated. They don't just walk away.
So let's zoom out. What does this all mean? When we look back at Chandragupta Maurya, what is the real, tangible legacy?
The legacy is the very idea of India as a single political entity. Before him, you had these fractured states. He created the first pan-Indian empire. He proved that the entire subcontinent could be unified under one administration, one system of roads, one currency.
And in doing that, he set the stage for his much more famous grandson, Ashoka.
Exactly. You don't get Ashoka the Great and his later spread of Buddhism and his philosophy of peace without Chandragupta building the ruthless bureaucracy, the roads, and the army first. In a way, Chandragupta did the dirty work so that Ashoka could later focus on Dharma.
And we can't forget the sheet anchor.
Right. Let's not forget Sandrakatas. Without Sir William Jones identifying him, we would still be lost in the timeline of ancient history. He is the bridge that connects the classical worlds of the East and the West.
It's such a fascinating story. You have a man who may have been born to a servant, who was mocked by kings, who learned warfare from the Greeks, who used elephants as a geopolitical bargaining chip, and who built a surveillance state that would make the CIA jealous.
And yet, the most enduring image, the one that has lasted for millennia, might be that final one, the old man on the hill.
And that's where I want to leave our listeners today, with a final, provocative thought to mull over.
Consider the full arc of his life. This was a man who fought his way up from absolutely nothing. He spent his entire life accumulating power, territory, and security. He was paranoid, surrounded by guards, desperate to survive at all costs, and yet, in the end, he potentially chooses to walk away from all of it and die of hunger on a quiet, remote hill.
So was it regret? Was it an act of penance for all the violence it took to build that empire?
Or was it perhaps the ultimate display of control? He had mastered the empire, he had mastered his enemies, and finally, by choosing exactly how and when he would die, he mastered the most fundamental force of all, his own survival instinct.
Mastery over the self. That's a deep dive. Thanks for listening.